Hey guys, Tom here again from SerumPresets.com, and in this tutorial we're going to be making from scratch a very similar sound to this one. It's kind of a deep house lead. This is actually lead 01 from my Deep House Volume 1 pack on SerumPresets.com, and I'll just give you a preview of it here. So we're actually going to be making this sound from scratch, but before I get into that, as I mentioned guys, this is lead 01 from my Deep House Volume 1 preset pack over at SerumPresets.com. There's actually 32 leads in this pack with 32 basses, 32 pads, 16 key sounds, and 16 effects. If you're interested in that, there's an audio demo and some more details about that again at SerumPresets.com. But without further ado, let's make an init patch here. And I'll go through making the sound. So first of all, we're going to start off in Oscillator A. Now, you'll have noticed there, if you've watched my other Deep House tutorial that I've uploaded so far, which was the bass sound, I'm actually using the same melody. Now, typically within a Deep House track, I mean, obviously there's no rules that producers have to abide to or anything like that, but typically the lead sound in a Deep House track usually mirrors the bass sound, and usually the track will drop with just the bass, and then after a few bars the lead will come in and it will be a pretty similar melody. It might not be exactly the same, but it's mostly going to kind of mirror it. Now, the thing is with that, because it's going to be playing at mostly the same time, we don't want those two elements, the bass sound and the lead sound, interfering with each other. So one thing that I usually do when creating a lead sound straight away is just bring in an EQ and just take off some of the lower frequencies. I mean, you don't have to be too extreme with this. I think around 200 hertz is somewhere good, and this way, you know, it's going to result in a much cleaner mix, and the kind of lead sound and the bass sounds aren't going to conflict with each other. So that's just a really good habit to get into from the start. In terms of what wavetable to use, in that preview that I showed you just there, I was using the, I believe this is the Juno wavetable. There's tons of waveforms to choose from, and this is actually the same wavetable that I used for the bass sound. Now, obviously there's no rules. Honestly, you might be better off using a different wavetable and experimenting a little bit and being creative, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be using the Juno wavetable in the very last wavetable position. That's just my kind of preference, but really, I really do encourage you to kind of experiment a little bit. The first thing we're going to do is take this down an octave. Now, the kind of lead sounds typically within Deep House tracks usually have quite a dark timbre. Now, you don't have to worry about this kind of sound interfering with the bass because we've already put this EQ on. So although we're going to be missing out a lot of the lower frequencies, it's not that important because it's still going to have that dark timbre, as I'll just demonstrate here. Now that's much darker than... So already, obviously, we've got a lot to do yet, so it doesn't sound great, but you kind of get what I mean by lowering the octave. There's going to be more low frequency content, so it's going to sound much darker regardless of what melody is actually playing. So the very first thing we're going to do here is use an envelope to control the amplitude of our sound. So we want this to be quite a plucky sound. So already there you can kind of hear the Deep House lead character, so that kind of plucky sound. Another thing we're going to do is we're actually going to have a lot of voices for this lead. We're actually going to use a 16 voice unison. Now, I'm sure as you've just listened, that makes an absolutely huge difference to the sound. I'll just show you a comparison. So this is with 16 voices. And this is with 1. It's almost laughable in comparison, and really the unison within Serum is really cool, and it's just like it makes such a huge impact. One thing we're going to do in this sound, which we actually didn't do in the bass sound, is we're going to automate the detune. So what we can do is use actually we're going to use a different envelope for this. 1 second, bring the sustain down. A little bit of a longer envelope for this. And what we're going to do is essentially automate the detune. We don't want it too far because we don't want it to go too off key. But this has a really cool effect in that when the start of the sound plays, all the voices will be kind of in tune, and then throughout the kind of sound, it all happens very fast, but they all detune and spread, and it's got this really, really cool effect. It's a really, really cool effect. I really like it. We could even go a bit more extreme. Really, really cool sound. So we've sorted out the unison, we've automated the detune, we've got a nice sounding wavetable. One thing we're going to add as well into the sound is some noise. So this will really help fill out the lead sound. And what I mean by this is that typically in a deep house track, there's not too much going on. You've got your kick drum, your snare and clap or whatever. You've got hi-hats, percussion. And then usually when a deep house track drops, as it were, there's really not too much going on. So something that's really important for deep house sounds is that they sound full, and that they take up a lot of the frequency spectrum, so you don't have an empty mix. And one really, really great way to achieve this with any sound, but specifically with a lead, is to add some noise. And because noise is usually, well, depending on the noise, but it's usually over kind of a wide spectrum of frequencies, that's really going to help fill out your sound. So we're going to use the same envelope we used for the amplitude of Oscillator A for the amplitude of the noise. We're just going to go with the basic analog noise, the ARP circuit, and this will just really help to fill out a little bit. I'll slowly introduce it and you'll see what I mean. So as you can tell there, I'm just messing around with the detune for now, but as you could hear there, introducing the noise into it makes it sound really full, and that will be really noticeable in a mix. Now, I'm not too happy with the detune at the minute. I think it sounds a bit metallic, and that's really common if you have a lot of voices in unison that are all very, very closely but very slightly out of tune. So what I'm going to do is make it so it's a little bit more detuned from the start of the sound. And that sounds much better to me. So we've sorted out the noise, we've sorted out the Oscillator A. Now we're going to use a basic low pass 12 dB filter, and we're actually going to do the same thing we did for the bass. We're just going to use an envelope here to modulate the cutoff. And that also really takes some of the harshness away from the detuned voices. It just takes that little bit of low end off, and it kind of softens it up a bit, but adds a lot of character. Now, one thing I've just noticed, because we've routed Oscillator A through a filter and it's removed some of the high frequencies from Oscillator A, it means that we can notice more of the noise oscillator. So what I'm going to do is actually reduce the volume of this quite significantly, and you'll notice that the noise isn't being routed through the filter, and that is intentional because we want the noise to fill out the sound of the lead and make it sound quite big in the mix. We don't want this kind of getting lost through the filter. So that's sounding great. I'm really happy with everything that's going on in the oscillator noise and the filter. So let's move on to the effects section. Now, we've already added the EQ. I mean, we could mess around with this further. So I mean, we can make it so that it's cutting off a lot of the low frequencies there. But I mean, really, this is something that you want to adjust once you've got everything in your mix and you've got your bass. You can kind of use your critical listening skills to listen to whereabouts this frequency knob should be. So for instance, if your bass hasn't got much high end or hasn't got many mid-low frequencies, you might want this a bit lower. If your bass is quite dominant in those lower frequencies, you might want to take this up quite a bit, just to create some room for that bass. So really it's just down to whatever else is going on in your mix. There's no really right place to put this. But one effect we are going to add, of course, to a lead sound is reverb. Now, usually, I mean, reverb isn't essential, but I would always pretty much recommend it on leads, even if it's just a little bit, simply so that it doesn't kind of sound so dry. So we're going to play around with these parameters a little bit and find something that sounds pretty good. So I brought the mix down of that there because when it's up here, as you'll hear, I'll just demonstrate, it sounds way too wet. So we're actually bringing this down here. Obviously, within Deep House, it has, like I mentioned earlier, quite dark timbres, so we don't want too much reverb. And another thing that we can do to make it sound even darker but still have that nice reverb is use the dampening parameter. And as you can hear there, basically that kind of attenuates some of the higher frequencies in the reverb, and makes the reverb a bit darker so it's not quite as bright. So when the dampness is all the way to the left, you can hear those really high frequencies in the reverb, but when we turn this up, it really kind of attenuates those a little bit and makes it sound a bit darker, so I'll just demonstrate here. I really like this parameter. It's absolutely awesome. So I'm happy with the size and the mix. We're not having to use the low cut parameter here because we've already got an EQ in the chain after the reverb, so all the lows are being taken out, so I'm not too worried about that. One other effect that is kind of optional, but I did have it on in the demonstration at the beginning of the video, is a delay, and I actually had this set to ping pong, and I don't usually like, for my personal taste, I don't like too much delay on a lead because I think it can kind of sound a bit tacky, but just a nice sort of bit of delay can really add a bit of character. So we're just going to play around with some of these parameters. So as you can hear there, that just adds a little bit more interest to the sound, and because in Deep House, as I mentioned, there's not usually too much going on in the mix, you can actually get away with having quite a lot of delay. So that pretty much covers the sound, guys. It's quite a basic sound, nothing going on with the LFOs or anything like that, just some simple envelope modulation, a bit of noise, using an oscillator with a lot of voices, a simple low pass filter and some effects. So hopefully you got a lot out of this video. As I mentioned before, you can go check out my Deep House preset pack over at SerumPresets.com if you want to get a pack of sounds like this. I really think those will be helpful to you both to use in your tracks and hopefully to kind of reverse engineer, get some fresh ideas for your own sounds as well. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. My name's Tom, and I'll see you in the next video.